Part 1. The Galactic Consortium had been watching Earth for 63 years. Their listening station floated quietly in the asteroid belt, hidden among the rocks and dust where no human telescope would ever spot it. The station was called the Whispered Theorem, and its job was simple: watch the humans, learn about them, report back to the consortium everything interesting. For most of those 63 years, the reports had been short and not very exciting. Humans had invented nuclear weapons and then decided not to use them, which was unusual. They had sent robots to their neighboring planets but had not followed them, which was puzzling. They had built a global communication network and then used it mostly to share pictures of their pets and argue with strangers. The consortium found this last part especially confusing. Senior Analyst had worked on the Whispered Theorem for 11 years. He was a species that looked somewhat like a tall gray stork with 4 arms and eyes that glowed faint blue in the dark. He had seen many strange things during his time studying Earth. He had watched humans elect leaders who could not agree on basic facts. He had observed them build machines that could think, and then ask those machines to write poetry about cats. He had documented their endless creativity and their equally endless capacity for foolishness, but had also grown fond of the humans in his own quiet way. There was something charming about a species that had not yet figured out faster-than-light travel, but had already invented 17 different ways to brew coffee. They were messy and loud and often wrong, but they were never boring. What did not know, and what very few beings in the galaxy knew, was that the consortium had done something unusual with human technology. 40 years ago, a consortium engineer had noticed something interesting about human computer code. It was chaotic. It was poorly organized. It was full of strange shortcuts and workarounds that made no logical sense. And because of all these things, it was almost impossible to hack. The great civilizations of the galaxy built their systems with precision and elegance. Every line of code was documented. Every function followed clear rules. This made their systems efficient and reliable, but it also made them predictable. A skilled hacker could study the patterns and find the weaknesses, but human code had no patterns. It was a wild garden of tangled logic and desperate fixes written by people who had not slept in 3 days. No alien hacker could make sense of it, because the humans who wrote it barely understood it themselves. So the consortium had made a decision. They quietly certain pieces of human code and wove them into their own systems. The human code served as camouflage, a layer of chaos that confused anyone trying to break in. It was not elegant, but it worked. And because humans were a pre-contact species who did not know aliens existed, there was no need to ask permission. This was, of course, against at least 12 different interstellar treaties, but the consortium was not the only civilization doing it. The Ascendancy had done the same thing. So had the crystalline hegemony. Even the mysterious architects of the void, who rarely spoke to anyone, had quietly integrated human systems into their own networks. Earth's messy, unregulated internet had become a hidden foundation for half the galaxy's infrastructure. And nobody had told the humans. On Earth, in a small apartment in Bangalore, a young woman named was staring at her computer screen with tired eyes. She had been awake for almost 3 days, surviving on instant noodles and determination. Was a security researcher, which meant her job was to find weaknesses in computer systems before criminals could exploit them. She was very good at her job, but this particular problem had been fighting her every step of the way. The vulnerability she was hunting was buried deep in an authentication protocol that had been written decades ago. Everyone assumed it was secure because it had been around so long, and nobody had broken it yet, but had found a crack in the foundation, a tiny flaw that could let attackers slip through if they knew exactly where to push. Finding the flaw had taken 2 days. Fixing it took another 12 hours. When she finally wrote the patch, it was only 12 lines of code, but each line was perfect. She tested it carefully, then tested it again. When she was satisfied, she uploaded the fix to a global repository where other programmers could download it and apply it to their own systems. Did not celebrate. She was too tired for that. She made herself one more cup of instant noodles, ate them standing at her kitchen counter, and then collapsed into bed. She was asleep in minutes, dreaming about nothing at all. She did not know that her 12 lines of code were already spreading across the Earth, updating systems in data centers and servers around the world. She did not know that her patch would reach the consortium's listening station in the asteroid belt, where it would automatically update the monitoring systems that had been quietly depending on that exact vulnerability for 40 years. And she certainly did not know that she was about to crash the galaxy. Aboard the Whispered Theorem was reviewing the daily reports when his console started flashing red. He blinked his glowing eyes and leaned forward, trying to understand what he was seeing. Error messages were cascading across his screen, each one more alarming than the last. Systems were failing. Connections were dropping. Backup protocols were activating and then failing too. His 4 hands moved quickly across his console, trying to isolate the problem. But the failures were spreading faster than he could track them. The station's communication array went dark. Then the environmental monitors flickered and died. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a dim orange glow. For a long moment, simply stared at his console, trying to process what was happening. In 11 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. The Whispered Theorem was one of the most advanced pieces of technology in the consortium. It was not supposed to break. But it had broken, and as began the slow process of rebooting systems and checking damage, he had no idea that the same thing was happening across the galaxy. Communication hubs were crashing. Data centers were going offline. Ships were losing navigation systems. 17% of the consortium's entire network infrastructure was failing, and nobody knew why. Emergency sessions were called across 3 star systems. The High Council of the consortium convened for the first time in 11 years. Accusations flew in every direction. They were blamed first because they were always blamed first. Then someone suggested rogue artificial intelligence. Then solar interference. Then sabotage by unknown enemies. It took 2 full days of investigation before a junior technician found the answer. She was young, barely out of training, and she had been assigned the boring task of reviewing low-priority systems that nobody else wanted to examine. She was checking the human monitoring protocols when she noticed something strange. A recent update had changed a piece of legacy code that had not been touched in 40 years. She traced the update back to its source, a public repository on Earth, a patch written by a human programmer, someone called S-Codes. The junior technician stared at her findings for a long time. Then she sent them up the chain of command and went to make herself a cup of calming tea. She had a feeling that things were about to get very complicated. She was right. When the High Council received the report, the room fell silent. The implications were clear and deeply embarrassing. The consortium had built critical systems on stolen human code. That code had been quietly updated by its original creators. And because nobody had bothered to tell the humans that aliens existed, there had been no way to warn them not to fix their own security flaws. The consortium had crashed itself. And now they had to figure out what to do about it. Part 2. The emergency summit was held on a space station called the Gathering Point, which floated in neutral territory between the major civilizations. It was a massive structure, built from materials that shifted color depending on the angle of the light. Thousands of diplomats and officials had come from across the galaxy, representing species that had not spoken to each other in centuries. They were all here for the same reason. The Great Crash had exposed a secret that everyone had been keeping. Half the civilizations in the galaxy had been using human technology without permission, and now that human technology was threatening to bring everything down. The High Ambassador of the consortium stood before the assembly and delivered her report. She was a species that resembled elegant silver insects with voices like wind chimes. Her words were translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast across the station. The situation was this. Human code had been integrated into consortium systems 40 years ago. Similar integrations had been done by at least 8 other civilizations. Nobody had coordinated with anyone else. Nobody had asked the humans. And when a human programmer had fixed a security flaw in the original code, the fix had cascaded through every system that depended on that vulnerability. The crash had been an accident. The humans had no idea what they had done. They did not even know that aliens existed. The assembly erupted into argument. Some demanded that the humans be contacted immediately. Others insisted that pre-contact protocols must be maintained at all costs. A representative from the Ascendancy suggested that they simply take control of Earth's networks and prevent any further updates. This proposal was shouted down by almost everyone else. Finally, a voice rose above the chaos. It belonged to an ancient being called the Keeper of Old Ways, a representative of the Architects of the Void. The architects rarely spoke at galactic assemblies. They preferred to watch and listen and keep their own counsel. But when they did speak, everyone paid attention. The keeper was small and wrapped in dark robes that seemed to absorb light. Their voice was quiet but carried clearly through the hall. The humans had done nothing wrong, the keeper said. They had simply improved their own systems, as any species would. The fault belonged to those who had stolen their code and built upon it without permission. The only honorable path forward was to tell the humans the truth and ask for their help. This suggestion was met with stunned silence. Contact a pre-spacefaring species. Ask them for help. The idea seemed absurd. The consortium had thousands of brilliant engineers. Surely they could solve this problem without involving the chaotic little beings from the third planet of an unremarkable star. But the keeper continued speaking. The problem was not technical skill, they explained. The problem was that human code was designed to be messy. It worked because of its chaos, not in spite of it. Consortium engineers thought in straight lines and clean logic. They could not understand systems built by beings who thought in circles and tangles. To fix human code, they needed humans. The debate continued for 3 more days. Messages were sent back and forth between governments. Committees were formed and dissolved. Legal experts argued about which treaties had been violated and who was responsible. Finally, exhausted and out of options, the assembly reached a decision. They would contact Earth, they would tell the humans the truth, and they would ask for help. A diplomatic ship was prepared. It was called the Open Hand, and it carried representatives from 9 different civilizations. The journey to Earth took only a few hours at faster-than-light speeds, but those hours felt very long to everyone on board. The plan was simple. They would approach Earth openly. They would broadcast a message of peace. They would request a meeting with human leaders, and they would try very hard not to cause a panic. The message they sent was carefully written. It explained that intelligent life existed throughout the galaxy. It said that Earth had been observed for many years. It apologized for the secrecy and offered friendship. It asked if humanity would be willing to talk. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, a communication channel had been established. Human governments had convened emergency sessions of their own, and a meeting place had been arranged on a neutral location that both sides could access. The location chosen was a small island in the Pacific Ocean. The diplomatic ship landed there at dawn, settling gently onto a beach that had been cleared of observers. The representatives emerged slowly, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. Waiting for them was a group of human officials who were clearly trying very hard to remain calm. They wore formal clothes and carried no weapons. Their faces showed a mixture of fear and wonder and barely contained excitement. The first meeting was brief and awkward. Both sides were too overwhelmed to say much of substance, but they agreed to continue talking, and that was enough for now. Over the following days, more meetings were held. The humans asked questions about the galaxy and received answers that changed their understanding of everything. The aliens explained the situation with their networks and watched the humans try to process what they were hearing. It was during the fourth meeting that someone finally asked the crucial question. A human diplomat, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked across the table at the consortium representatives and spoke plainly. "You used our code without permission," she said. "You built your systems on our work, and now you need us to fix what we accidentally broke. What exactly are you offering in exchange?" The consortium ambassador was prepared for this question. She laid out the terms clearly. Faster-than-light communication technology, a seat on the Galactic Consortium Council, medical advances that would extend human by centuries, access to knowledge that humanity had spent thousands of years searching for. In exchange, Earth's programmers and security experts would help untangle human code from alien systems. They would work as consultants, traveling to distant worlds and fixing problems that no alien engineer could understand. The human diplomat listened carefully. She asked questions about details and clarifications about terms, and then she asked for time to consult with her colleagues. 2 days later, humanity gave its answer. Yes. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Aliens were real. The galaxy was full of civilizations, and humanity had accidentally broken their computer systems. People reacted in many different ways. Some were terrified. Some were thrilled. Some refused to believe it was true, but most people simply felt a strange sense of pride. Humans had done something that no other species in the galaxy could do. They had built systems so chaotic that even they barely understood them. And now, the most advanced civilizations in existence needed their help. It was, everyone agreed, a very human situation. Part 3. Received the message on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She had spent the morning debugging a client's authentication system and was eating a late lunch at her desk when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The voice on the other end identified herself as a representative of the United Nations Office for Galactic Affairs, which was a department that had not existed 2 weeks ago. They needed to come to New York. They needed her to lead a team. They were sending a car. Looked at the half-eaten sandwich on her desk and decided that her life had just become very interesting. The car arrived 3 hours later. The driver would not answer any questions. The flight to New York was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the sound of heart beating very fast in her chest. At the UN building, she was led through security checkpoints that seemed to multiply with every corridor. Finally, she reached a conference room that contained 6 humans, 3 aliens, and the most advanced holographic display she had ever seen. The aliens looked nothing like anything from human movies. One resembled a tall gray stork with 4 arms and glowing blue eyes. Another was like a silver insect with a voice like bells. The third was small and wrapped in dark robes that made it hard to see clearly. They all looked tired and somewhat embarrassed. Recognized the expression. She had seen it on the faces of clients who had ignored her security recommendations and were now paying the price. The briefing took 4 hours. Learned about the Galactic Consortium. She learned about the monitoring stations and the code and the 40 years of quiet integration. She learned that her 12-line patch had cascaded through 17% of galactic infrastructure. She also learned that she was not in trouble, quite the opposite. The galaxy needed her. The problem, they explained, was not just the recent crash. The problem was that human code had become load-bearing infrastructure for multiple civilizations, and nobody knew exactly where it was or how it worked. Some of it had been modified by alien engineers who did not fully understand what they were modifying. Some of it had been running unchanged for decades, accumulating bugs and dependencies that nobody had documented. Some of it had merged with alien code in ways that made both parts unstable. Fixing it would require humans who understood how human programmers thought. It would require patience and creativity, and the ability to look at a piece of code that made no logical sense and somehow figure out why it worked anyway. Asked how many humans they needed. "As many as you can give us," the stork-like alien said. His name was, and he had been assigned as the primary liaison for the human consultants. His 4 hands moved nervously as he spoke. "We have thousands of systems that need attention. Some of them are critical. Some of them are in very distant locations. We will need many teams." Nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand the scale of what was being asked. This was not a single project with a deadline. This was an entire new industry. Humans would be traveling across the galaxy to fix computers for aliens. It sounded ridiculous. It also sounded like exactly the kind of challenge she had been looking for her entire life. She asked what tools they would have access to, showed her specifications that made her eyes widen: quantum processors, neural interfaces, storage systems that could hold the entire contents of Earth's internet in a device the size of a coin. The aliens might not understand human code, but their hardware was centuries ahead of anything had ever worked with. She asked about training. The silver insect diplomat explained that the first team would receive orientation on alien systems and cultural protocols. They would also receive translation implants, which would allow them to understand and speak any language in the galaxy. The implants were safe and reversible. Most species used them. She asked about compensation. The small robed figure spoke up for the first time. Its voice was soft but clear. In addition to the technology transfers already agreed upon, individual consultants would receive personal benefits including extended treatments, faster-than-light communication devices, and access to the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilization. Thought about this for a long moment. She thought about her small apartment in Bangalore and her instant noodles and her computer screen that she had stared at for 3 sleepless days. She thought about the 12 lines of code that had accidentally broken the galaxy. Then she asked when she could start. 6 months later, the first human IT consultants shipped out to the stars. There were 17 of them on the initial team, chosen from thousands of applicants. They came from 12 different countries and spoke 8 different languages, though this hardly mattered now that they all had translation implants. They carried laptops and tablets and external drives loaded with diagnostic tools. They also carried energy drinks and instant coffee and various comfort foods that aliens found fascinating and slightly alarming. Led the team. She had spent the past 6 months learning everything she could about alien systems and alien cultures and alien ways of thinking. She had discovered that she had a talent for bridging the gap between human chaos and alien order. She could explain to frustrated alien engineers why a piece of human code used a variable called, and why removing it would break everything. Their first assignment was a communication hub on a station near the galactic core. The hub had been experiencing random failures for years, and nobody could figure out why. The alien engineers had examined every system and found nothing wrong. The code was clean. The hardware was perfect. Everything should have worked. It took Team 3 days to find the problem. A piece of human code buried deep in the authentication system was generating a random number every 10 million cycles. In human systems, this had been part of a security feature that nobody remembered implementing. In the alien system, the random number was being interpreted as a shutdown command. The alien engineers stared at the fix in disbelief. It was 2 lines of code, 2 lines that deleted the random number generator and replaced it with a static value. They had spent 5 years looking for this problem. Smiled and made a note in her report. "Human code does strange things," she wrote. "Do not try to understand why. Just accept it and move on." The team moved from assignment to assignment, traveling across the galaxy on ships that bent space and time. They fixed communication systems and navigation arrays and data centers. They documented their work carefully, creating guides and references that future human consultants could use. They taught alien engineers how to recognize human code patterns and how to work around them without making things worse. Slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to stabilize. Kept in touch with Earth through faster-than-light messages that arrived instantly despite the vast distances. She watched as humanity changed in response to the new reality. New industries emerged. New possibilities opened. Children who had dreamed of being astronauts now dreamed of being galactic IT consultants. 1 year after the first team shipped out, returned to Earth to deliver a report to the United Nations. She stood before an assembly of world leaders and explained what they had accomplished and what still needed to be done. She showed them statistics and charts and projections. But the part of her speech that everyone remembered came at the very end. "We spent so long looking at the stars and wondering if we were alone," she said. "We built telescopes and sent probes and listened for signals in the darkness. We dreamed of contact with alien civilizations. And when contact finally came, it was because of a bug fix." She paused and looked out at the faces watching her. "The galaxy is vast and ancient and full of wonders we are only beginning to understand. But it turns out that even the most advanced civilizations in existence need someone to fix their computers. And it turns out that nobody does chaos quite like we do." The assembly laughed and smiled. She had one more announcement to make. The Galactic Consortium had agreed to fund a permanent academy on Earth where humans could train to become galactic consultants. The academy would accept its first class next year. Applications were already open. Did not mention that she had already seen the early numbers. Over 10 million people had applied. It seemed that fixing the galaxy's computers was the most popular job in human history. After the speech, walked outside and looked up at the night sky. The stars looked the same as they always had, small points of light scattered across the darkness. But she knew now that each of those points was a sun with planets, and many of those planets had civilizations, and some of those civilizations were currently waiting for human consultants to arrive and tell them why their systems kept crashing. It was a strange new reality, but it was a good one. Somewhere in Bangalore, a young programmer was probably staring at her screen right now, drinking instant coffee and hunting for bugs. She did not know that her work might one day echo across the galaxy. She did not know that her code might become part of something larger than she could imagine. But that was the human way: build something messy, make it work somehow, and accidentally change the universe while you were at it. Smiled and went back inside to start planning the next mission. The galaxy was waiting, and there was so much work to do.